In this video, I want to review with you some basic guidelines to document your ideas and citing your sources when you're writing an academic paper. And this is really, really important. Not properly citing your sources or not documenting your ideas clearly can cause a lot of trouble and make you vulnerable towards accusations of plagiarism, and you want to avoid that. So the manual or the structure you'll be using to document your sources and to format your papers are the guidelines by the American Psychological Association, short APA. And what I'm reviewing, the few things I'm reviewing today from the APA manual comes from the 6th edition manual. October 2019 will mark the publication of a new 7th edition manual, supposedly with color tabs and very exciting. So until then, we're stuck with the 6th edition, and that's what I'm basing all of my formatting guidelines on for this video. So first thing I want to review when in-text citations are needed. So they're needed when you paraphrase material from another source, when you summarize material from another source, or when you use a direct quote or quotation from another source. You'll be wondering what the difference is between paraphrasing and summarizing, and I will explain it to you in a few slides. So in addition to in-text citations, when you document your ideas and the material taken from other sources to construct your papers, you will also have to construct a reference page with reference entries. And those are needed for any kind of source, any article, any website, any manual, any whatever source that you're citing in text needs to find its way to the reference page. So make sure that everything that you cite in text comes to your reference page, and everything that's on your reference page is actually cited in the text. So let's look at some in-text citations, some examples, and some basic guidelines to construct in-text citations, where to put them, and some best practices. I have a few examples here of some text, either written summaries of mine or some citations. If you want to read them before continuing with the video, just hit pause, take a moment to read it, and then continue, or just read it while I'm talking as well. So I've taken a couple of passages from an article published in Nurse Educator in 2019 to show you some in-text citation strategies. So when you're summarizing in here, usually when you summarize, you put a lot of information, maybe the whole content of the paper, in a few sentences, just to give your reader a quick overview. So a lot of information goes into small amount of text that you're creating. And here I chose to actually include the author's name within my sentence. So this is how I then use the in-text citation. So in a recent study, Hampton, I use the author's last name, and then in parentheses I put the year, 2019. That's a standard in-text citation. Author's last name or last names if there's more than one author, and 2019 is the year. And just FYI, if you have more than one author, there are certain guidelines and rules within APA how to cite authors, 3 to 5 authors, 6 authors or more, and so on. So make sure you familiarize yourself with those as well. I'm not going to review them with you, but I did include some links to some great resources in the resources section in this module that will give you guidance on those. So in the recent nursing study, Hampton 2009 argues that nursing faculty's efforts and so on, and then I'm summarizing my understanding of the text, and these are all my own words. I didn't take pieces from Hampton's article. This is just all my own writing. Now, if I didn't want to include didn't want to integrate the author's name into my sentence, and I'm just going to state the fact, which would probably start right here, right? So I would take this out. Nursing faculty's efforts to include writing strategies in their classrooms play a significant role in influencing the quality of writing among students in Doctor of Nursing programs. And there should be an FD, apologies for that. So I still got a cite. So what I would do is at the end of the sentence, I will put the author's last name, Hampton, 2019, and parentheses in the period then, because the citation is always part of the sentence. That's another way to do an in-text citation for summary. Instead of using the author's name within my sentence, I just state the fact, or the information I summarized from the text, and then at the end of the sentence I'll indicate where it comes from. Now when I'm paraphrasing, I do it, it's very similar to summarizing. The only difference is that when I paraphrase, when we paraphrase, we tend to put information in our own words from a specific sentence or couple of sentences, so we're going to stay very close to the content, which can actually be very difficult. Paraphrasing is not easy. So the example here is the original. Again, pause if you want to read through it. Here is my paraphrase, and again I chose to use Hampton's 2019 5-year study focused on how faculty in a DNP program with exclusively online courses integrated a writing curriculum into their classes, with the goal to develop individual writers in their program. So you see, I didn't use, for example, an online DNP program because that would have been a little bit too close to the original. Technically in APA, 5 words or more is when you have to start citing, but I think it's always good practice to put as much as possible, if not everything, into your own words. So I chose to say DNP program with exclusively online courses. So I just rephrased it a little bit to make sure that it's in my own words. And then the third option, remember from that slide, for in-text citation, the third most common in-text citation, is to use a direct quotation. And I want to say something about direct quotations here, that I'm personally not a big fan of having lots of direct quotations in my own papers and in my students' papers. As a reader, it makes it very hard to follow if you constantly have somebody else's voice in there. But if you have to use a direct quotation, nothing wrong with that. I would suggest you what I call integrate it into your own sentence, and I'll show you an example in just a moment. Here again is the original that I'm using to, that I'm going to be quoting in my example here. So I start off my sentence again. In her study, Hampton 2019 focused on, and I start the quote here, 12 writing development strategies. It comes right from the beginning of the sentence here. End quote, that broadly focus on the 4 areas of, and I continue quoting right here, content, construction, format, and plagiarism or citation use. So I'm actually quoting from 2 different sentences, but using it in one sentence, which is perfectly fine. They're all on one page. So the real big difference in terms of citation style is when I quote, I must include the page number. Must. For paraphrasing summaries, I don't have to. I'm not required to based on APA guidelines. Some instructors might still want you to do that, but in most published, well, let me put it this way, I don't think I've ever seen a published manuscript that had page numbers for paraphrased or summarized passages. It's really reserved for direct quotations. The other thing you might have noticed is this little thing right here, those square brackets that I put this T in, and that's because by integrating the parts of the original quote into my sentence structure, I changed the beginning of the sentence to the middle of a sentence. So I couldn't have the capital T here, that would be incorrect. So I'm using a square bracket to tell my readers that, hey, listen, I've changed something here. And whatever I changed, I put in the square bracket. Okay, just a little trick for that one. So the next slides, I'm showing you some paragraphs of some example paragraphs that are either lacking proper in-text citations or completely or partially. And I'm doing that because I see this a lot in writing, in student writing, and I want you to be prepared to avoid this and not get marked down possibly by your instructor. So here's a paragraph. So pause here for a moment and read through it. So if you're getting nervous that there is no citation in here, good, you should. There need to be citations in here. The first sentence is a topic sentence, right? Support for women in labor is a natural and commonplace event across communities, cultures, species, and history. I'm like, ooh, that sounds interesting. I wonder how this author can make this claim. Well, they can make the claim because in the next 3 sentences, they have 3 sources that support it and provide some more information. So the next sentence, there is a long documented history of non-medically trained women, blah, blah, blah. Here comes the first source. Next sentence, it wasn't until the 1970s, blah, 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 Raphael, 1973. However, and so on, Cahill, 2001. So great documentation throughout this paragraph of the historical, to support what is in what is stated in that first sentence, namely that women in labor have always been supported throughout history and across cultures. And here are the examples. Without these citations, this would be considered plagiarism. And it's a serious academic offense that you all know of. So avoid that and make sure you clearly document ideas. The one thing that I often see is when students feel like, oh, this is common knowledge, I don't have to cite it. Common knowledge, what is considered common knowledge and doesn't have to be cited, is something like the earth is flat. Or, let me think of another example. Water freezes at 32 degrees Fahrenheit, right? It's 0 Celsius. I know the metric system better, so water freezes at 0 Celsius. You don't have to provide a citation for that. That is common knowledge. But if you're writing something like, this is about doulas, and you're writing, oh, the term doula means labor companion. I'm like, well, where do you get that from? You need a citation for that, even though you might think, oh, that's common knowledge. At least, especially if you work in the field of midwifery or OBGYN support of women, labor support, and so on. So it is not common knowledge. It needs to be cited. Just as a quick example. So, as I said, every sentence except the topic sentence draws on a different source and hence needs to be cited. Sample paragraph 2, and this 2 and 3, the next two are kind of similar. And so if you look at this one, you again have a topic sentence, so that's okay, it's a lead in into the topic of the paragraph, and then it continues with according to London and Landis, 2019 again. When you use the authors in whatever way, make sure the date is right next to it. Either in parentheses if you have the name in your sentence, or if you have it in all the names of the authors in parentheses, then the year goes there. And so the paragraph continues, some information, there's another sentence here, and I'm noticing there's no citation, and there's no citation here either. And that also makes me nervous, because as a reader now I'm wondering, okay, so is this stuff coming from the same source? And what about this? Is this another source? Or I know the writer didn't make this up. Again, it could be cause for potential accusation of plagiarism. So if you construct a paragraph like this based on one source, which is perfectly fine, and actually I recommend this as you're drafting and outlining, make sure you cite the very first time you draw on your source, which this author has done here. And if you don't want to cite it after each sentence, let's say you have 4 or 5 sentences all coming from the same source, it's going to look a little insane having the same source after each sentence. If that's the case, make sure that whenever you draw on the source the last, either the last sentence of the paragraph or close to the end, you repeat the source here again. So, London and Landis, 2019, parentheses, period. And notice how the ampersand replaced the end in the phrasing. So within the parentheses, it's never end. It's always the ampersand within the parentheses. So this I see a lot. So make sure that you pay close attention to this. What I also see a lot is the exact opposite, where it's the same paragraph, just some things changed around, where nothing is going on in terms of in-text citation until the very, very end. That's also a problem, because I'm like, okay, it's only this part from London and Landis, so where's this coming from? So make sure that you would include the citation here as well, just like in the earlier paragraph. So let's talk about reference page entries. You will have a reference page at the end of your paper. It starts on a new page. The heading references is centered and not bold. Reference page is double spaced, no extra space between different entries. References are listed in alphabetical order, and second and subsequent lines of a reference are indented with a tab space. Let me show you an example here. This comes from the Purdue Online Writing Lab. So here again, middle is not bolded, just in the center, the heading. Alphabetical, the second and subsequent lines indented one tab space. Everything's double spaced. So this is really, really important. You might notice some things are italicized, some are not. This depends on some of the APA style convention. Make sure you review those carefully in some of the resources that I've provided you with. One thing I do want to show you though about online sources. So if you have a pure online source, like I just had the APA sample paper from the Online Writing Lab, you want to include something like retrieved from and put the URL in there and take the hyperlink out. What you don't want to do is, if I have this article by Hampton, don't put the hyperlink that you've accessed the paper on. You see, it's super long. So don't do this. Rather, what you want to do is you include the DOI, the Digital Object Identifier, tough word, at the end. You don't need retrieved from. For articles that are published in journals, but you're accessing them online. That is not a pure online source. So make sure you keep that in mind as you're drafting.